The unseen CEO. A corporate reckoning, the executive boardroom at Sterling Solutions buzzed with tension. Sunlight, usually a beacon of hope, seemed to cast long, anxious shadows across the polished mahogany table. Amelia Hayes, her movements deliberate and almost imperceptible, pushed her mop and bucket across the floor. Her mind, however, was far from the mundane task. It was a whirlwind of observation, noting hushed conversations, deciphering fleeting facial expressions, and meticulously mapping the intricate power dynamics at play. She wasn't merely a cleaner. She was the architect of this very building, the owner of the vast corporation whose future hung in the balance, and a silent observer who had temporarily shed her CEO title to understand the rot festering within her recent acquisition. From a quiet corner, Amelia watched the impeccably suited figures, many of whom were blissfully unaware of her presence. They were engrossed in a debate over cost-cutting strategies, discussing departmental layoffs with chilling detachment, and framing their inevitable decline as a necessary restructuring. None suspected that their fates were being scrutinized by the one person who held the ultimate power to shape their reality. Amelia had acquired Sterling Solutions just a few months prior. Once a titan in the tech industry, the company had faltered under a cascade of mismanagement, ego-driven leadership, and a debilitating lack of innovation. What had truly struck her during her review wasn't just the alarming financial figures or the plummeting market share. It was a profound disregard for the employees, the blatant neglect of the very people who were the bedrock of the company's former glory. Her decision to embed herself as a janitor hadn't been made lightly. Amelia had spent her life climbing from the very bottom, born into a family with meager means in a forgotten industrial town. She had witnessed firsthand how those in power often dismissed individuals they deemed unworthy. She built her own empire from the ground up, fueled by countless sleepless nights and a relentless drive to prove herself in rooms often filled with people who saw only her gender or perceived lack of privilege. The profound lessons she learned in humility and unwavering perseverance were the very principles that guided her to this pivotal moment. It had been 2 weeks since she'd taken up the mop and bucket. Each day, she was exposed to the same ugly truths: casual microaggressions, condescending remarks, and dismissive attitudes. The moment she donned the janitor's uniform, she became invisible, a mere fixture to the very people whose careers she now controlled. Amelia understood the critical importance of grasping the company's true ailments, not just from sterile spreadsheets or polished executive reports, but from the unfiltered perspectives of the workforce itself. She bent down, meticulously wiping a phantom coffee stain from the floor as the voices in the room intensified. "We simply can't sustain these benefit packages," declared a senior executive, a tall man with perpetually cold gaze, his voice dripping with arrogance. "If we trim 20% of the lower-level staff, we can appease the board for another quarter." Several heads nodded in unison, their eyes fixated on the alarming charts projected on the wall. Amelia's heart tightened. She had witnessed this destructive strategy too many times before. Layoffs that disproportionately harmed the most vulnerable, cuts that left the remaining workforce demoralized and depleted. The company was being cannibalized from within, with no thought to the long-term repercussions. One of the men, Marcus Thorne, a mid-level manager whose ambitions far outstrip his actual capabilities, glanced briefly at Amelia before rolling his eyes. "These cleaners," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. "We could cut them too. I mean, they're barely necessary. Why do we even need so many?" The comment stung, but Amelia maintained a neutral expression, continuing to wipe down a nearby table. She had endured far worse in her life, yet still astonished her how effortlessly some people could dehumanize others when they believed no one important was listening. Amelia wasn't here to react to petty insults. She had a mission. She needed to unearth the deep-seated rot within this company, and each day spent pretending to be at the bottom of the ladder revealed just how pervasive it was. Later that day, in the cramped break room, Amelia sat alone at a small, chipped table, sipping lukewarm coffee. Around her, other employees gossiped, oblivious to her presence, treating her like an inanimate object. "Did you hear about that new cleaner?" chuckled Sarah, an administrative assistant, her voice carrying across the room. "She's so quiet, barely says a word. I bet she doesn't even speak English." A chorus of laughter followed, but Amelia remained still, her expression unreadable. The comments were familiar, and she had long ago learned to let such things slide. Yet, it wasn't the insults that truly disturbed her. It was a profound complacency. No one questioned the casual prejudice. No one stood up for the janitor who, in their eyes, didn't warrant a second thought. It was in moments like these that Amelia truly felt the weight of her decision to disguise herself. The disdain from those around her was palpable, but it also granted her invaluable insight. She now understood that the corporate culture wasn't just flawed. It was deeply toxic, a poison seeping from the very core. She would need to do more than merely restructure departments and adjust financial strategies. She would need to rebuild the company's moral foundation. That evening, as Amelia finished her shift, she walked through the near-empty office halls. The building felt different at night, quiet, almost serene. She paused near the CEO's office, staring at the brass nameplate that still bore the name of the previous owner. In a few weeks, that plate would bear her name, and when it did, she would unleash a reckoning no one anticipated. For now, she would continue to observe, to listen, to endure the casual humiliations and petty slights. She knew that when the time came, every single person who had treated her with such dismissiveness would finally see her for who she truly was. And in that moment, the balance of power would irrevocably shift. Amelia took a deep breath and turned away from the office, heading towards the exit. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome respite from the heavy tension that had accumulated throughout the day. As she walked to her car, she couldn't help but contemplate the coming storm. They wouldn't see it coming. They never did. But she was ready. She had always been ready. The next day began just as the others had, with Amelia donning her cleaner's uniform and slipping into the office unnoticed. But this time, she felt the weight of her mission more heavily than ever. The disdain, the casual biases, it was all part of a system she was about to dismantle. For now, though, she had to endure, because true, lasting change didn't happen overnight. It required patience, and Amelia had mastered the art of patience long ago. As she pushed her mop down the hall, she knew that soon the very people who dismissed her would be clamoring for her attention. The morning sun, usually a cheerful presence, filtered weakly through the large glass windows of the corporate building, casting a muted glow. The usual hum of activity in the hallways was replaced by a more subdued murmur, laced with anxiety and speculation. Amelia, dressed in her janitor's uniform, moved through the building as she had for weeks, but today felt fundamentally different. There was a palpable sense of impending doom in the air, a tension that vibrated through every interaction. Rumors of sweeping layoffs had spread like wildfire, and the whispers of imminent disaster grew louder with each passing hour. Today, everything would change. Amelia knew that this day would mark a pivotal turning point, not just for Sterling Solutions, but for herself. The upcoming board meeting would determine the corporation's very future, and executives would once again convene to make decisions that would impact hundreds of lives. They would discuss mass layoffs, draconian budget cuts, and the chilling possibility of shuttering entire departments. Amelia had witnessed this grim scenario before. Executives desperately trying to salvage their own positions while callously sacrificing the livelihoods of those they deemed expendable. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the long hall, she felt a strange amalgam of anticipation and resolute determination. She had endured the snide remarks, the condescension, the casual prejudices, all for this precise moment. This wasn't merely about rescuing company. It was about proving a fundamental truth to herself, to the employees, and to the world at large. She had observed the decay from the inside out, and now it was time to act. The boardroom, with its sleek leather chairs and imposing glass table, was already occupied when Amelia entered to begin her cleaning routine. The meeting was still an hour away, but the executives had gathered early, huddled in small, anxious groups, discussing the impending crisis in hushed, urgent tones. Amelia recognized most of them by now, the same faces that had consistently dismissed her as insignificant, irrelevant, nothing more than an inanimate fixture in the room. Marcus Thorne, true to form, was front and center, his booming voice carrying across the room. He was in the midst of what appeared to be an impromptu pep talk with some of the other senior managers, though his tone was far more self-congratulatory than genuinely inspiring. "We're going to have to make some tough decisions today," he declared, crossing his arms with a self-assured smirk. But it's for the good of the company. We simply can't keep all these unnecessary people on the payroll. It's time to trim the fat. Several others nodded in solemn agreement. Amelia couldn't help but feel a surge of indignation as she meticulously wiped down the conference table. Unnecessary people. That's how they referred to their employees, as if they were disposable, as if their livelihoods held no weight. She had witnessed the raw fear and deep uncertainty etched on the faces of the lower-level workers, the very individuals who would bear the brunt of the callous decisions being made in this very room. Thorne, utterly oblivious to her presence as always, continued his pronouncements. The janitorial staff alone could be reduced by half. We don't need so many people to keep the place clean. Hell, I bet we could outsource the entire department and save a fortune. Amelia gritted her teeth but kept her eyes fixed on the table, biting her tongue. She had heard enough over the past few weeks to fully comprehend the true nature of these individuals, how effortlessly they dehumanized others, reducing them to mere numbers on a spreadsheet, cold statistics in a financial report. But today, she would not remain silent. The hour passed swiftly, and soon the room filled with the remaining executives, each taking their assigned seats around the expansive table. As the meeting was called to order, Amelia moved quietly to a corner of the room, blending seamlessly into background as a janitor, her presence utterly unnoticed by the powerful men and women who were about to decide the fates of hundreds of employees. The current CEO, a portly man named Robert Sterling, stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. "We're in deep trouble," he began without preamble. "Our projections for the next quarter are far worse than anticipated. If we don't take immediate, drastic action, we're looking at a total collapse. We need to cut costs across the board, and that means layoffs. Deep layoffs." Amelia listened intently as the grim conversation unfolded, each executive presenting their own variation of the same flawed solution. They spoke of slashing jobs, closing entire departments, mercilessly reducing benefits. Not once did anyone mention innovation, growth, or investment in the very people who made the company function. It was all about cutting corners, saving their own skins, while callously ignoring the long-term consequences. "I propose we begin with the administrative staff," one of the executives interjected, glancing at a stack of papers in front of him. "We could reduce their numbers by at least 25%. That should provide us with enough breathing room for the next quarter." "And the cleaning staff," Marcus Thorne added quickly, his voice tinged with predatory eagerness. "We could outsource that entirely. There's no need to keep them on payroll when we can contract a third-party company to do the same work for half the cost." Amelia's grip tightened imperceptibly on the handle of her mop. She had heard enough. She knew, with absolute certainty, that if she didn't act now, the company would spiral into a catastrophic decline that could have been entirely averted. The decisions being made today weren't about salvaging Sterling Solutions. They were about preserving the bloated executive jobs at the brutal expense of everyone else. For weeks, she had kept her identity hidden, observing, learning, meticulously understanding the full scope of the problem. But now, it was time to reveal the truth. Amelia was ready to take control, but she needed to execute it strategically, not impulsively out of emotion. As the executives continued their oblivious discussion, Amelia quietly set her mop aside and walked with deliberate purpose to the head of the table, where Robert Sterling stood, pontificating. She tapped him lightly on the shoulder, her heart pounding a steady rhythm in her chest as she prepared to shed the elaborate facade she had maintained for so long. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady and firm. Sterling turned to her, startled by the unexpected interruption, his brows furrowed in profound confusion as he stared at her, clearly not recognizing the woman standing before him. "Yes? What is it?" Amelia met his gaze without flinching. "I think it's time I spoke." The room fell into an abrupt, stunned silence. All eyes suddenly were on her. The executives exchanged bewildered glances, utterly unsure how to process the sight of the janitor standing at the head of their prestigious table. Marcus Thorne, ever the arrogant opportunist, was the first to break the silence. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "This is a private meeting. You have no business here." Amelia didn't react to his dismissive tone. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small, pristine envelope, the very envelope that contained the unassailable documentation of her ownership of Sterling Solutions.